with Jason Esteves, who is the current chair of the Atlanta Public Schools Board of Education and also VP over at Equifax. And this is one of our insight conversations as part of the ATL Education Expo. And to really pull back the veil of the different journeys people can have in and around education, especially here in Atlanta. So really excited to chat with Jason today and hear about his journey. Jason, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Ian. Thanks for having me.
So first things first, I want to just get a little background. How did you start out in education? And ultimately, especially in Atlanta, what was that journey like?
Yeah, so for me, my journey in education started in Houston, Texas, when I was a first-year teacher, teaching 7th grade Texas history. And I did that through Teach for America. So prior to my senior year in college, I had not thought about education or teaching in schools. But as I was graduating, really wanted to make a difference and didn't really know how. And ultimately applied to Teach for America by the insistence of a friend of mine at Miami. And that really did change my life, because that first year teaching, as many of y'all know, is the hardest thing that you can ever do in life. Right. But it's literally harder than law school, than practicing law at a law firm. I mean, it's ridiculously hard to do that first year of teaching, to get through the first year of teaching. But what that experience taught me was that there were so many things impacting my students' education that were happening outside of the classroom. And so much of it had policy reasons behind it. And I wanted to figure out a way to impact that policy. So because of my teaching and the experience I had, really being a leader for the first time, being a 22-year-old recent college grad, and having 150 middle schoolers looking up to you, it really inspired me to kind of think about what else I could do. As my kids moved up to the 8th grade, I moved up with them and taught them 8th grade. And then once after my second year teaching, they moved off to high school. For me, that was a natural breaking point to where I would go off to law school as they went off to high school.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think speak for all teachers when everything you just said resonates very deeply. That first year is really tough. And I was 22, 23 when I started too, teaching 9th grade. And, you don't realize it. You really don't understand the power of being a teacher until you are one and you have 150, 180 kids on your roll, and you're really responsible for their success. So that's incredible. What ultimately led you to Atlanta?
Well, I wanted to go to a great law school, and I'm from Columbus, Georgia. So originally from Georgia. Always saw Atlanta as the city on the hill, as they say. And when I got accepted, I applied to law schools all over the country. When I got accepted into Emory, it was a no-brainer for me. And I'll tell you, I've been wanting to come to Atlanta for a long time. Even when I applied to I don't like to tell the story, but I'll tell it anyway. When I applied to Teach for America, Atlanta was my first choice. I realized, like some of my friends, that you could literally only put one city in your preferred list. I thought you had to put several cities, so I put several cities. Houston was like number 6 on my list. Atlanta was number 1. Yeah. So when I got into Teach for America, I called admissions and was like, "Hey, I really want to be in Atlanta. What do I need to do in Atlanta?" And they were like, "Well, you can not do Teach for America and just go. But if you want to do Teach for America, unfortunately, you have to be in Houston." So Atlanta's been on my mind from the beginning. Right. And that opportunity with Emory.
What made Atlanta a destination for you?
Like I said, having been raised in Georgia, having been raised in Columbus, an hour and a half south of Atlanta. Atlanta was always seen as that city
Yeah.
that you'd want to be in. And frankly, it just so happened that my dad and his family still lived in Georgia, and many of my extended family lived in Georgia.
Gotcha.
My best friends from college had ended up in Atlanta, so it was all kind of
Yeah.
a mix of things that made Atlanta the destination for me.
Gotcha. Okay. So you came to Atlanta and started law school after having been in the classroom. So assuming you completed law school, what happened right after that? And ultimately, how did you end up going back into education on the policy side?
Yeah, well, I never lost interest in public education, even through law school. So I was involved in volunteering in local schools and local organizations here in Atlanta during law school. I took an education policy class during law school,
Gotcha. Yeah.
and was still involved in education stuff while in law school. So um, for me, I never separated from that Teach for America, that teaching
Yeah.
experience.
You never lose that lens.
Um,
Once you've been a teacher, it's really hard not to see everything through that lens because we all go through it, right? Like that's why everybody has strong opinions about education because we've all been students. And we also, if you've been in the classroom on the teacher side, you have strong opinions because you realize like a lot happens there that impacts the rest of your life. So that makes a lot of sense. So you definitely viewed the world still very much through an education lens, stayed involved, completed law school, and then what happened?
well, and then while I was a lawyer at a law firm, became interested in politics,
Mm.
and
Right.
and frankly, it was because of the leadership experiences that I had in Teach for America. Is because of the leadership experience that I had in law school that I felt like I should be able to run for office and make a policy impact, like I originally set out to do when I went to law school in the first place. And really, I didn't know where I could make an impact as far as being an office holder.
Yeah.
But I had folks who, when a school board seat came open in Atlanta, came up and talked to me and sat me down over breakfast and dinner. And I started hearing from multiple people like, hey, you should think about running for school board. It's a great opportunity in Atlanta with,
Yeah.
recovering from the cheating scandal, with all the school board members, the vast majority of the school board members, really just the vast majority of the school board members were not running for reelection at that time. So it was an opportunity to have a brand new school board. And then the superintendent at the time was an interim superintendent. So that new school board was going to pick a new superintendent. And
Right.
really, the opportunity in Atlanta was to press that restart button.
Yeah.
So for me, you had two different dynamics. You had folks talking to me about the opportunity to run for school board, and then you also had this opportunity of being able to make a huge impact
Right.
if I did get on that school board, by the fact that you'd be able to really help rebuild Atlanta public schools from scratch.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's such a seminal moment in APS history for sure. So I want
Yeah.
to dig into the breakfast and dinner part of this story. So like, I think again, it's like when people hear politics, you imagine like there's a separate world that exists, and there's this
Yeah.
secret group of people that they're the ones who pull the strings. And maybe I mean, I've been involved in politics a little bit, obviously not to the extent you have, but there are obviously operatives and folks who their life is policy and politics. So there's that. But walk me through like did somebody like call you up and say, hey, Jason, how does that happen? Like, give me a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah. So a couple things have to happen. And I know when people say that I was asked to run for office,
Hmm.
people who hear that are like, they roll their eyes. They're like, yeah, okay, whatever. But it really, literally does happen that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had the same conversation
Because,
with a board member, and they said the same thing in Cobb.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it literally is. Um, you have to express or show people that you want to be a leader, right? And that you're passionate about issues, that you're willing to be out there on specific issues. You can do that on social media. You can do that just amongst your group of friends.
Yeah, right.
But if you show people that you're interested in those policy issues, what will ultimately happen is when an opportunity opens up, likely it's someone who is more engaged in that circle of politics than you are, will
Yeah.
come up to you and say, hey, I've noticed that you've been talking about these education issues. Well, there's this opportunity over here that I think you would be qualified for. Have you ever thought about it?
Yeah.
And it's literally like that, just somebody planting the seed. And then from there, you kind of go on your own
Right.
and pursue the opportunity. But it
Okay. So
literally does start with those opportunities. I did not go into law school. I ran in 2013. In 2012, I was not thinking about school board. In
right.
early 2013, I was not thinking about school board. I didn't really know what school board members did, frankly.
Yeah.
I was more focused on the state legislature and
Right.
Congress and the positions we all hear about, right?
Right. Right.
But it was literally people coming up to me and saying, "Hey, you should think about running for school board."
Yeah. So you had that breakfast, and probably a couple of them. Yeah, a couple of people be like, Jason would be a great candidate. What happens next? Like, what did you have to physically do? And I'm sure there was conversations with your family too. Like, what did you consider?
That's number one. That's number one. I had a wife at the time, so that was very important to have that conversation with her. But
Yeah.
really, it is talking to folks who are politically plugged in. Who those people are in your life,
Mhm.
and it's really the initial conversations are just about just asking questions and getting more information, and
Yeah.
those people will connect you with other politically connected people, and then you have more conversations. And initially, for the first uh, few weeks, few months, depending on how much time you have, it's really connecting and getting ideas, getting a view of the landscape, um, before you make the ultimate decision to jump into a race. There's some
Mhm.
really technical things you have to do, like file with the state or the city that you're
Right.
in. You have to open a bank account and register, all
Gotcha.
that stuff. But really, the groundwork starts with the conversations before. So I went to a whole bunch of breakfasts and lunch and grabbing drinks with people who are
Yep.
just in the know to get a feel for whether it was something I should do. That's on top of the conversation that you have with family.
Right, right. Yeah, I want to ask you about because you mentioned it, like when you even consider running for office in general, like one of the big things, and obviously APS is the center of Atlanta education, and so you mentioned a willingness to put yourself out there. How much of that was part of the conversation with your wife, and how did you get yourself mentally to a place where, like, you know what? Because if you're an elected official, you're going to get stuff thrown at you. A lot of times, it's not even directed at
Yeah.
you personally; it's at the system or the structures. But how did you get yourself up for that, or was it a lot of just, I was kind of naive too about what it would actually be like and feel like, or was it both?
Oh, you're definitely naive. So you're definitely naive in this thing. When at the outset, all first time candidates are naive. And for me, I had actually run for the state house about a
Right.
year and a half before I ran for school board. And with the state house, it was the same thing. Someone had actually talked to me about running
Okay.
for the state house.
Gotcha.
I lost that race, so a lot of lessons learned in that
Yeah.
race.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was not running
Right.
for like the foreseeable future. I was done
Yeah.
at that point.
Absolutely.
Um, but then when folks started talking to me about the school board seat, my wife was extremely supportive and was perfectly okay with it. Um, but that's also because she knew that I was interested in it
Yeah.
and willing to do it. And to your point, it takes it take I say this tongue in cheek, but it takes a certain kind of crazy to run for office,
Yeah.
because what you're essentially doing is you are walking out into the middle of the road and you are singing a song in the middle of the intersection,
Hmm.
and you're hoping that at the end of the song, people have stopped to notice you and they clap.
Wow. It's a
right?
fascinating metaphor.
That that takes that takes a certain kind of confidence,
Yeah.
ego, crazy, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Everyone who's run for office has had to have that,
Yeah.
because it's the only thing that makes you sign up to run in the first place, and then actually go to random people and not push a company or an organization. You're pushing yourself.
Yeah. Right. Right.
What you were saying, vote for me, give me money so that I can be elected for this office on behalf of the people. That's a different kind of message, and
Yeah.
it takes a mindset, to a certain kind of mindset, for you to be able to do that. So for teachers who are thinking about, educators who are thinking about running for office, you kind of do that on a daily basis in your classroom,
Sure. Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Really, for running for office, you just have to extrapolate that, and
To
just,
adults.
instead of kids,
Right.
you're talking to adults.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really all it is.
What okay, you now you're like running for office. What does running for school board really consist of in like a campaigning sense? Is it just going anywhere and everywhere?
Yeah, well, I I shouldn't say this to your audience, but I'll say it anyway. Campaigns are the worst part of of
Sure. Hey,
just
this is
being
true. I
an
mean,
elected
the real
official,
story.
because at the end of the day, like I said before, it isn't it isn't Terra, it isn't Equifax, it isn't
Right.
some party or organization. It is you. So Ian is on the ballot,
Yeah.
Jason is on the ballot, and everything that happens you take very personal, because you're
Yeah.
not talking about anything else other than yourself. So when you're running against an opponent, it's a different kind of competition. It's
Yeah.
stressful, because you're running against other people, and they're not running, again, they're not running against the, amorphous thing. They are running against you.
Right.
So it puts on a certain kind of stress. But at the end of the day, what it is making sure that you organize your thoughts, that you have a platform that makes sense for your community, that you talk to as many voters as you can, whether that's through face-to-face contact, whether that's through text messages, emails,
Yeah.
mail pieces, whatever it is, that you're communicating with voters, that they know your platform, and that you get them out to vote. And that takes money. So fundraising is a big component
Right.
of being elected to office, and then being present and being visible. So the technical aspect of running a campaign, for me, comes down to raising money and communicating with voters. Those are the two things that are a must. It's
How do you
it's
remember how much
incredibly hard to
you had to raise for that first race? Or how much
so
you
I
did?
had to, yeah, for because my seat was and is an at-large seat, it's
Right.
citywide. I had to raise, and I had a runoff. I think I raised $150,000.
Wow. That's not a small
Yeah,
amount.
and you do that. No, and I should say that raising money, that's part of what makes campaigning terrible, is you have to raise money,
Yeah, of course.
because you have to call your long lost cousins that you haven't spoken to in 20
Right.
years.
Yep.
You have to talk to your college classmates that you haven't spoken to in 15 years, and you have to call them and ask them for $250 or $500 or whatever the number is.
Right.
And it's uncomfortable, because again, you're not asking for money on behalf of an organization.
Yeah.
You're asking for money for you,
Yeah, and you
for
could lose,
you,
like you could lose.
and you can lose. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. I
I
mean,
think sorry, I go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say. I mean, there's so much that goes into saying, and there's no incentive other than someone's appreciation for you and what you bring to the table and what your platform has to offer.
Right.
It's not like they get a tax deduction. It's not like they get, some prize if they
Yeah.
give you money. It's literally just people giving money to you.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a lot of pressure, and it makes for some awkward conversations. But the most beautiful thing about this process is it will surprise you who gives you money and who doesn't. Sometimes,
Yeah, I bet.
the people who are closest to you may not give you as much money as you think
Right.
because they may not be into politics.
Yeah,
But
sure.
then you'll get a random person from college, or you'll get a random person from your school, uh, who you may have thought didn't like you, and they'll give you like way more money than you ever imagined
Yeah.
someone would give you, and it just brings a smile to your face. So there's
Yeah.
some pleasant surprises in that process as well.
Yeah, especially in today's world with social media, where I'm sure you started getting donations from all kinds of folks that some of you probably never even met
Yeah,
before. And as someone who's
for
raised money
sure.
multiple times myself, I know that feeling. I have not raised it for myself, which is a whole nother level of vulnerability, but I definitely get the struggle. And I think that's one of the things that you're touching on that we probably don't give any elected officials enough credit for, is just having the courage to run in the first place, right? Like, you are literally putting yourself out there. It's so easy today to be a social media, armchair philosopher, politician who can comment on
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
It's really hard to be the person who actually goes out there and runs for office. That's still a thing people do.
Yeah.
As we're not all elected officials as much as we act like it. So, power to you for doing. I want to shift the conversation. So now you've been on the board for how many years now?
7 years. This is my seventh year, or
Awesome.
this is
So
my eighth year. Yeah.
right, right. So tell us, I would just love, we're not going to dive into all the board's ins and outs. I really wanted to focus on that journey part, but I'd love to hear, as a former teacher, especially now having this really different vantage point, what are some things you've learned along this way of being a school board member?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the two big lessons. One is that, um, how complicated the system is, and
Yeah,
because of how complicated it is, how important every piece of the puzzle is. From the custodian to the cafeteria worker, to the bus driver, of course, to the teacher, to the school leader,
right.
to the superintendent, to the school board. There are so many pieces, so many competing priorities in this,
Yeah,
um, that decision making gets very complicated, because you have people in one breath saying that they believe in equity and they believe that children deserve as many resources as they need to succeed, and then with that same person, you ask them about taking some resources that their kids are currently getting and giving them to someone who needs it, and they immediately say, well, no, 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 I
right.
meant that
Yeah,
in abstract.
right,
Don't actually use another bucket of money. Don't take my kids' money.
right.
So there, because of those competing interests, it's difficult to get things done, which is why it takes time, because priorities need to be shifted, and you can't just do that immediately. You have to do that over time. So I, I think that complexity really came to light during my last two terms of school board. And then, to me, the most important thing that has been highlighted by my experience on the school board is just, it's something that many of us already know: the systemic racism, systemic uh, barriers um, of breaking out of poverty that exist.
Yeah,
It's just so challenging to defeat, to remove those barriers.
right.
And it takes more than just schools. It takes policymakers across all levels. It takes community organizations across all levels. It's going to have to be an effort, from the grassroots all the way to the grass tops, to get it
Yeah,
done. And while I have a lot of concern about that because of how monumental the task is
right.
to in my mind, eradicate policy with poverty. Sorry,
Yeah,
eradicate poverty, which is very closely tied in this country to racism.
right.
It's a daunting task, but what gives me hope is the fact that the more time as time goes along, I see people talking about it and calling it out more and more.
Yeah.
And the more we do that, the more we call it out, the more hopeful I am that we'll actually do something about it. And when we talk about education equity, when we talk about fixing schools for our kids, we can't do that unless we fix our communities, unless we fix our state, and unless we fix our country.
Yeah.
We need to stop relying on school buildings to fix the problems that the community and the country has put on our neighborhoods.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think, on the one hand, it's really easy to sit on the sidelines and commentate. And I'm the best Monday morning quarterback there is for NFL games. But in reality, as you mentioned, like the complexity makes every issue gray, right? There's there's very few clear wins. Like this is definitely the best thing. There's always give and take because it's just that complex of a system. And I think people need to appreciate that more and also be prepared for that. If you're going to be a leader, you're signing up for leading, making tough
Yep.
decisions. And that's, again, something that I definitely admire about all of you folks who've taken that role. And then I'm losing my train of thought here, but the second thing I wanted to say was, I think it's funny. The school systems are becoming this lightning rod of controversy, especially in light of COVID and everything this year. But it's amongst all the adults and none of the kids, right? It's like a building
Yep.
full of children
That's right.
where we all have our arguments and take out like our cultural conflicts on each other. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I met a woman once who used to work for Ted Kennedy before he passed away. And she said that he told her once that good policy is trying to move a mountain an inch over a generation. And I think to your point, like it's very hard for us to notice the progress we do make, but the conversation around equity, even when I was, 10 years ago, it was not a conversation.
Yep.
It was barely a thing people spoke about. And we won't notice
Yep.
this ourselves until years from now because we're so in it. But I think you're right. Like we really are making progress and dialogue when it comes to policy is such an important marker of progress. So I think you're absolutely right. And that is something to be hopeful for. So on that front, I want to finish with our final question. If you're imagining education in the year 2050, so 30 years from now, give or take, what do you think it should look like, and what do you hope I hope it will look like?
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that it's an interesting question because school today, I'll say this much: school today looks very similar to what school looked like 50 years ago. um, and I don't mean that as a good thing, right? There's so many things that we're doing today that were also being done 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So if I look forward, 30 years to 2050 or 29 years, I guess. I hope that we would have innovated more than just the curriculum, which is what so many of us have focused on, the programming and the curriculum.
Right.
I want school days to look differently than they do now. I want school years to look differently than they do now. Why are we stuck on this on this August through May school year when it should probably be year round?
Yeah.
What should teachers be doing in classrooms? Because they've literally been doing the same thing for dozens, if not hundreds of years. Can that look different as technology is advancing, as our options are expanding? I think that it will. So for me, it's less so the programming nature and the curriculum.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that we see a significant difference in the actual structure of our education system. I think our structure needs to look different than it does today. And like the story you gave about the moving, or anecdote about moving a mountain an inch. that's going to take time, because this way of thinking about education has been it's part of our DNA.
Yeah.
And I think it fundamentally needs to change going into the future. We need to look at different ways of having a school year, school day, of grouping kids together. I mean, all that stuff. I think there's opportunity to change all of that, and I hope we do. I hope that by the time my kids are 20 years old, and they're thinking about teaching in classrooms, that it won't necessarily be classrooms, and that it won't be where they have, the summers off. It will look different than it does today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you humoring me on that question. And I think with leaders like yourself in place right now, we're on our way. So we'll end our conversation here. Thank you again, Jason Esteves, the chairman of the Atlanta Public Schools Board of Education. And also, people don't realize you still have a full-time job over at Equifax too.
Full-time job.
Amazing job managing that. But we thank you for being a part of this.